I'm 74 years old, and I was born in Vienna, Austria. In 1938, we fled Vienna when Hitler came to Austria. We first went to France for 9 months, then actually came to what was then Palestine for 3 years. So I lived in Tel Aviv until 1942.
This is the voice of Fighting Zion, the underground radio of the Irgun Spy Leumi.
We realized, even as little children, we were at war.
Today, our soldiers, in defense of their country, attacked the enemy's police headquarters in Jerusalem.
I was, in fact, living in a Jewish city, in a pre-Israeli Jewish city, Tel Aviv, of the early 1940s. I was just a small child, between the age of 4 and 7, but it was during the Second World War. I remember one air raid where eventually about 100 people got killed, which was the Italian Air Force raided Tel Aviv. And we played down on the beach, yes, offshore on the beach. There was the wreck of a boat of illegal immigrants that had tried to come into Israel. My father was actually a Zionist, but the situation was tough. It was economically very, very difficult. And both because of the economic reason and my father's fear that maybe the Nazis would get here as well. When we had the opportunity to leave at that time, he decided we should leave. I know he regretted it later. My father's former employers had moved their capital and started a lumber business and brought us out to Canada in the middle of the Second World War, to Vancouver. I always felt maybe we should have stayed and not gone to Canada. As a little child, I always wanted to go back. I know that from my father's diary. He was only at that time maybe 7,000 Jews in Vancouver. It was a small community. And the Jews there were of East European origin. So that immediately meant, from my parents' point of view, there was a social divide. So we stuck to a very small group of Central European Jews. Our family was not in any way religious. The identification was Jewish, but the observance was not. They were totally secular, but they were secular Zionist. They even came from the same neighborhood in Vienna that Theodor Herzl lived. Indeed, Theodor Herzl's children were contemporaries of my father, and he went to school with them. We realized that the Jewish people, as a people, had a distinct identity, and in a situation where apparently if you had a distinct identity, you had to have your own nation state or assimilate or disappear. Herzl used the term state for the Jews. He didn't say Jewish state, and perhaps that's also the way my father would have seen it. I joined the Habonim Labor Zionist Youth Movement. Until I joined Habonim, I had no real contact with the Jewish community. The Zionism that I came around to espousing, when I was about, let's say, 16, 17 years old, would be the idea that it's not just the state for the Jews, but it has to make Judaism relevant and ensure the continued creative survival of the Jewish people, not just survival. Otherwise, there's no point in being a Jew. Why be a Jew? It's just a bother, really, unless there's a purpose. My real exposure to Judaism in some ways began only much later when I came to Israel, actually. For the first 23 years of my being in Israel, I was in Kibbutz Gesher Haziv. I married there. I had 3 sons there. My first wife was born in Iraq. So my children are half Iraqi and half American, which really links you personally with the whole business of the Jewish people coming together in their homeland. In 1986, however, I moved to Kibbutz Lotan, mainly for ideological reasons. My 45 years of kibbutz life, I've been involved in educational and economic aspects of kibbutz life. I felt connected to an aim which is over and above myself, that I was part of something significant in history going on, which gave significance to my day-to-day life, where we are literally sitting at the moment Apparently, 3,500 years ago, some people who eventually became part of the people of Israel passed through on their way to Egypt. One of the things which creates a bond with the land is simply getting to know it. In other words, we relate here through the landscape to our history, and Palestine, in the sense, the modern political sense, is something that was artificially created by the British in 1921. There is a Palestinian people today, no doubt about it, but they were born about 100 years ago, partially as a result of us. If you go back a little further, this whole area is really part of what the Syrians see as Greater Syria. And theoretically, Jordan is part of Palestine, or Palestine is part of Jordan, if you will. And that makes a two-state solution much more logical. The vast majority of Israelis, the vast, all the way from the left, way over to the right, are not prepared for an Arab majority in Israel. The minority does not have the right to impose its concept of identity on a majority. The practical conclusion is, therefore, that we create a two-state solution. It doesn't mean that we can't have minorities who have their cultural rights. I mean, let's face it, the Arab countries have no Jewish minorities anymore. They're not tolerated at all because they're not democratic, essentially speaking. Israel is a democratic state. It's a Jewish and democratic state. Okay, we have an Arab minority, and while there's no doubt in my mind that in many ways the Arabs were and are disadvantaged relative to other Arab populations, they are the most advantaged because they're the only ones living in a democratic society. They're prepared to criticize the government, they're prepared to demonstrate, but they know very well that they're much better off in Israel than they would be in Palestine. Many of them feel they don't want to live in a Jewish state. They would rather have Israel be like the United States, where it is a nation of all its citizens. But that is not, within the context of history, the situation. One of the fundamental principles of democracy is the right of the minority. If they have major problems in being citizens loyal to the state, to its existence, then I think they have a problem. The first necessity for a state which is going to be Jewish and democratic is that there has to be a framework for recognizing, in fact, there's more than one way to be a Jew. That's really the fundamental thing. And if we think that you can only be a Jew if you are following the 613 precepts of the Shulchan Aruch, which Orthodox Jews see as guiding them, well, Orthodox Jews are a minority, and the common denominator is that, of course, Hebrew is the official language, and the annual cycle and the rites of passage of the individual and the symbols around them are the core symbols of the story of the Jewish people. And there are many in Israel who actually ignore that, the so-called secular Jews. In my opinion, you can't have a democratic state where rabbis determine what's going to happen. And you can't have a Jewish state if it ignores the major symbols of Judaism without trying to relate to them creatively. The kibbutz movement in general was one attempt to make irrelevant Jewish life an expression of Judaism in the modern day and age. And of course, here in Lotan, we're a community of purpose, and that's a very unique thing to be part of such a community of purpose. The energy needed for that kind of Jewish enterprise can apparently only be generated within Israel. That's the historical lesson. We have not yet succeeded in generating a meaningful Jewish state the way we should. I think we've done a lot. I think the accomplishments in 60 years have been unbelievable, taking into consideration where we started from, simply unbelievable. But what we're talking about may be a work for many generations.